Hello, so in this video, I'm gonna do something a little different. Instead of just talk mostly about everything, I'm going to try to quickly take you through the general workflow that I do for creating something in Mesh. So this is very broad. It could cover anything. Um, in this particular example, I'm just going to walk you through with me as I create my group gift for my store group for the upcoming month of June. So there are a lot of parts to this process. It's not going to be perfect. I'm trying to do it all today and all in one sitting. So because normally a big mesh project could take me days to complete all the steps of the process. So this is the first time I've ever done this. Just bear with me in any you know hiccups along the way. Um, some of the things I'm gonna cover are I just kind of broke down the process into steps that I do. This might not be how the next person does it, but this is what works for me, and this is generally what I stick to. So um, when I want to do a mesh project, or any project really, I like to start with a sketch of the idea of what I want to do. So, that could be on pen and paper, it can be on one of the online sketch tools that I showed in my previous video, or sometimes I don't even do a sketch. Sometimes I know right away, I have a visual in my mind of what it looks like, what I want to make. So have the idea ready. Number two is research. So if I need to, say for example, if I want this to look realistic or like it came from a certain time era or a certain style, I will go online or open books that I have here at home. I have a lot of vintage books actually that help me with my vintage inspired projects. So I will go into research and look up examples of, you know, things I can draw inspiration from. Not copy, not duplicate, but draw inspiration from. So I'll talk about that, how I do that. Also, will include creating a Pinterest board, like an inspiration board too. And number three is to actually create the creating process. So this would be to go into Blender and make the mesh, or fill in the blank if you're going over to Photoshop to make something there, or GIMP. And then, so that's kind of a process that's a little bit, has several parts to it by itself. So I'll go into that in more detail as I do it. Number four would be to upload to SL, so bringing the creation into SL. And I'll go over that as well. Number five would be to fix any issues. So once the mesh is uploaded or whatever is uploaded, check for issues, errors, and just keep uploading until you have what you want. Number six would be to apply textures and scripts to the items. So just to equip the item with any contents that are needed to complete it. So if it needs to be textured, that would be uploading textures, putting those on. If it needs to have scripts to make it, resize or make it function in a certain way, you would do that. Or adding anything to it that needs to be added. And then number seven would be to photograph the item. So just to set up a little scene where you can photograph it and bring that into Photoshop or GIMP and work on creating your advertisement for the item or whatever kind of picture you want to display on your vendor or on Marketplace or wherever. And then eight is to just package, go through the whole packaging process. I'll go through how I do that, because I have that even down to certain steps that are pretty routine by now. Number nine would be product testing. Now I have an assistant. I have a manager, first of all, who helps me with that, but I also have recently hired someone to help me as an assistant for product testing. So that I can help to eliminate errors, because sometimes when I'm tired and working a lot, I overlook little things and make mistakes in my product, my end product. So it's good to have someone else that you can pass things to, who you trust, who will take the time and has a good eye for detail and sit there and pick through the contents of your package, will look at your item that you made and test it out and let you know, report back to you if there are any issues there that you need to fix. Never just send a product out. I mean, unless it's like an emergency and you're pretty sure that it's 100% and you have no choice, you have to do what you have to do, but always find some time to go back and check it and make sure it's okay. Otherwise, you can end up with messages, which I do sometimes, from customers telling you that, your item doesn't work or there was a problem, and then you have to just fix it. So that kind of saves time with that. Even if you have to go on an alt to do that, to look at the item through someone else's perspective, to check permissions and all that, just do whatever you have to do. And then number 10 is to set up the display. So going to set up wherever you want to sell the item or distribute it, like literally going to either your main store and setting up where you want people to be able to buy it, or if you're doing this for an event, go to the event and set up the display there or on the marketplace. And then number 11 would be to announce the item. So that would include, social media and in-world group notices and all of that. So that's the general process. There are a lot of steps. I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible, so I apologize if there are parts that I rush through. This is really just to give you a quick idea, a glimpse at how I do it, how it can be done. I'll try to go into detail where I can, but this is just to kind of give you a visual. And then, in later videos, I will go into certain parts of these steps in detail, such as creating mesh in Blender, or, making textures in Photoshop, or whatever. So let's just do it. Okay, so I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as possible, but some parts might be a little detailed. So where I want to start with my process of creating this mesh, my group gift, is I want to begin with a sketch of the idea that I have. So I'm doing my group gift for next month. I want to do a cluster of picture frames that are in the more classic vintage style. And so I did a sketch on paper of what I had in mind, but I don't have time to scan that in. So I'm just going to do a quick sketch up of that on this free online web sketch pad that I featured in my designer resources video. It's at sketch.io. I'll link to that below. And so it's going to be just really quick and rough. It's not going to be a really neat drawing, just to give you an idea of how I go through this process. So I know that I want to have an oval mirror in the middle, and I want to just have a cluster of little frames that surround it. If you've ever seen some of those Victorian homes where the walls have these clusters of many little pictures of like family members and just whatever, that's kind of what I want. I know I want to have a pattern in there, and I'm going to want these faces of the pictures that are blank to be able to be textured in world. So for example, the person who receives this gift will be able to modify and drop their own texture, their own picture onto those faces of those frames, and I will go over how to do that when I get to the Blender step of actually creating the frames in Mesh. So I figured that doing frames is a good place to start, simple, to give you an idea of how to do a simple project in Mesh in Blender using different assigned faces for textures. Okay, so that's just a basic, and I know that I want this to be like a mirror. So it's just a basic sketch of what I want to do. So once I have that, I can either leave it open, or you do have an option over here to save it, to export and save it to your desktop if you want to come back to it later. I'm just going to leave it as is because I have this design on paper. And what I'm going to do next is my research step. So if I know I already have this idea, but I just want to check what do real picture frames look like, or the style I'm going for, I'm going to go to Google and just type in like Victorian wall pictures, and see if there's a picture of kind of for inspiration of where I want to go with it. It's not going to be too fancy and detailed. I don't have much time for this month, but I'm gonna do more simple version. So kind of, I'm seeing some pictures here of what I was going for. So it's pretty typical, I guess, in a lot of pictures I see of old Victorian homes. The walls have these really condensed clusters of pictures. And let's see if there are any more over here too. I just really love that look. So that's kind of what I'm going for a little bit, in a more very simplified version. So, okay, so your research can be anything. You can come online, look at images, or open books you have, go to the library, and look at anything for visual inspiration of what you want to do and to get an idea for realism if that's what you're going for. So also another thing that I do sometimes is I will go to Pinterest, and I have inspiration boards there. Like for example, if I want to I'll see if any of these will let me pin them, because some pictures are not allowed to be pinned. Um, let's see. Say for example that I just want to pin this image. Then what I can do is create a board for the project that I'm working on. So if say June group gift, and I want it to be secret because I like to keep my inspiration, some of them secret, private rather, and create the board, and then it's going to be there so I can save my pin to that board. If you're familiar with Pinterest, you will already know how to do this. If not, I'll go over that, I guess, in another video. So I've got my research step complete. Now I'm going to jump over to Blender and just start making the mesh. Okay, so here I am in Blender, and I'm gonna start to make my frames based on my sketch that I just showed. I'm gonna do this kind of quickly. Let me see and make sure if just in case you are already familiar with Blender and have a general idea of how to use it. I'm going to display my screencast keys. If you don't know Blender and have no idea what's going on here, this is just to give you a visual idea of how this process would work, or could work, if you want to make something in Mesh. So I'll go through. I don't know if I'll do the entire project here on video, but I will go through at least getting started and talk about how I would do a frame. So let's see, I'll try to get through this the best I can. So I'm going to go into edit mode so I can get rid of this plane because I want to start with my mirror, which will be in the center of the cluster of pictures. So I'm going to hit X and delete vertices, and I'm going to get centered in my scene again with Shift C, so that my cursor, my 3D cursor, and everything is on the center of the grid. So let's see, I'm going to add, Shift A, add a cylinder, and now I'm going to rotate my view some. Over on the left side there's a panel that is called Add Cylinder, and it's got the properties for the cylinder, which if you've ever tried to do this in Blender and had problems, make sure that you choose the settings before you deselect or click anywhere on the cylinder. So over here you have to choose your settings first, otherwise you lose the settings and have to create the cylinder again. So this is 32 vertices. That would make a really nice smooth cylinder around the edges, but that will be a little prim heavy, so I want to do maybe like 24 vertices around the circle, or around the cylinder. Alright, so I'm gonna go with 24 for now. Sometimes I go even lower to like 16 if I can get away with it with doing cylinders. You just have to decide where you're willing to compromise smoothness for a lower vertice count. in the end. Okay, and then over here under cap fill type, I like to choose nothing so that I can create the caps on my own, and the caps are just the centers of the cylinder, whether they're filled in with a continuous face or whether they fill it in with Blender will fill it in with triangles, as you can see, which is the proper way to fill a cap on a cylinder, is with you know, quads or triangles. But I just rather do this on my own when I get to that point because I don't like to have to mess with the triangles yet. So I'm going to choose nothing, and then I'm going to go and over to the left side here, the shading tab, because I want to make this smooth, because as you can see, if I go into object mode the way it is now, you can see the way that the shading is, you can see the edges of each edge loop, and I don't want that because it doesn't look smooth. So I'm gonna change the shading to smooth. So back in edit mode, which is being really slow, and smooth at the top here, smooth faces. That's something I always do every time I start with mesh, is all the parts of the mesh that I want to have smooth shading, I will hit smooth, and if for some reason I wanted the face to have flat shading, I would change it to leave it at flat. So I want smooth in this case, and thinking of this becoming an oval frame for a mirror, what I need to do is, right now it's vertical, so I'm going to rotate it on the X axis. The axis, X, Y, and Z axis works the same in Blender as it does in SL. So when you're in SL and you're moving an object, you know, either left or right, up or down, and you have the colored arrows, they are equivalent to the grid in Blender, which is nice because, you know, if you're already familiar with moving objects or even building in world in Second Life, it's going to be a similar process in Blender, similar concept, similar grid space. So whenever I want to rotate in Blender, I need to figure out which axis it is I want to rotate the object on. In this case, it's the X, going horizontally. And if I can move my camera because of it being so laggy. Alright, so there's a shortcut for rotating, and it's just R, and then because I want the X axis, I hit X, and then because I want to do it exactly 90 degrees, I hit 90 and enter, or left click to confirm that move. So now I have the cylinder the right way, facing me, but it's really thick. So the first thing I'm gonna do is, and this is just the way that I model in Blender. Your process can be completely different, the order that you do things in. I'm gonna try to turn my camera a bit here. So to make it thinner, I want to use the stretch function, which works the same way as in SL. I mean, you can stretch along whichever axis you want, just like I rotated on the X-axis. What I want to do is stretch on the Y-axis, the green line. So I'm going to hit S. The key is S for stretch, and then I want to hit Y because it's for the Y-axis, and actually, hold on a second here. S and Y, and then I want to just pull my cursor in toward the center of the grid, but not so far that it starts to invert. If you did that by mistake, there's a way to fix that. You can just flip the direction of the normals, which I will get into another time, but go far enough that it's the thickness you want and without inverting it. And I want to go even thinner, so I'm going to get a little more precise, and I want to, at the bottom here, I'm going to choose Edge Select, which is there are 3 buttons here. The first one is Vertice Select, next is Edge, and then the third is Face. So if I just want to select the edges and not the vertices, which are the dots, the points, then I want to be in edge select mode. So I clicked that, and now I can pull my edges along whichever axis I need to. And I just lost my cylinder. Because of the lag, it's really causing a problem here with my camera movement. So okay, I want to pull this edge loop in on the Y so that I can make it thinner for a frame. So I think about about there is good. And I'm going to try to slowly rotate my view so I can see. Now, I'm going to keep this, there are a couple ways to do this to get this filled in more like a frame. First of all, I'm going to deselect the edge loops, select all, which is just the A key. A is for select and deselect. And I want to get more in the front view here, so I'm going to turn my camera a little bit. Another way to get into front view is hitting the 1 key on your number pad, which is front view, and I'm not going to do that right now because it'll probably just lag me out. But what I want to do is make this an oval, so I don't want it to be a perfect circle. So to get it to be an oval, I need to stretch it along the red x-axis. So I'm going to hit S for stretch and then X, telling it which way to stretch, and then I'm going to pull my cursor in toward the center. That's a little too far. I just want a slight oval, probably around there. And I'm going to left click to confirm, or I could have hit the enter key. And now that I have the shape I want, I can work on filling in the rest. So I want the back side of my frame to be flat. I'm not going to get into much detail in the back of the frame because it's going to be against the wall. So I'm going to go back down here and make sure I'm in edge select mode here and select, which if you hold the Alt key in Blender and right click on the edges, the edge loop that you want, you can select a whole edge loop that way. I won't get into that detail right now because I'm not teaching you how to use Blender right now. And there are many videos out there for how to do these specific things I'm doing now. So this is just to give you a quick overview of how I get through a mesh project. But I figure I can say some of the things along the way. So I have that selected back there. I'm going to fill it in with the extrude function. So I'm going to hit E for extrude, immediately left click to confirm so that it doesn't move out of place. And then I'm going to come over to, I could either hit S for stretch and bring those faces in, or I could bring them into the middle by going to the left side here under Tools, scroll down until I find Merge, or the short key for that is Alt and M for Merge. And then I get that menu, and I want to merge those edges at the center, and that will create my triangle fan that I want to be a cap on the back of my frame. So I'm going to work on the front now. I want to fill in the front with a frame edge. So I Alt and right clicked on the edge of this edge loop here, and I'm going to extrude just like I did in the back, but I'm not going to merge them at the center. So because I want the frame to have an edge that's open. So I'm going to E for extrude, immediately left click to confirm the extrusion, and then I'm going to hit S for stretch and just bring them in. When you just hit S and you don't indicate an axis like X or Y, it will pull in all the directions, all of the axis directions. So it'll pull on the X and Y, the X and Z in this case, for what you're trying to modify. So I think that a thickness of about there is good. I'm going to left click to confirm that, move this to the front view a little bit more so I can see what I'm doing. Actually, no, I'm going to keep it a little bit sideways so I can see how the thickness goes here. I'm just going to work in mostly extruding. I extrude a lot when I model to get edges and things the way I want them. So I'm going to add depth to this frame edge by doing the E for extrude and left click to confirm and pull in on the Y. Or I could have hit E and then Y to extrude along the Y-axis, but just because I'm lagging out right now, I'm just going to do it the manual way by dragging it on the Y-axis. I think that's okay. If I have to adjust the thickness of that later, which I might do a little bit right now, then I can do that, pulling them back a little bit. Whoops, that was too far. Right there. Okay, I'll work with that. So now I'm going to pull it to the front a little bit more so I can fill in this face, the center face that will be the mirror, the face of the mirror. So I'm going to do another E for extrude, left click to confirm, and then I'm going to pull up my Alt M for my menu to merge, or over here it's on the left side under your Tools tab, the merge. I can do it that way too. At center, because I want those vertices to merge at the center, just like the back. And there's my front face of my mirror. So that's how simple it is to do a frame with an edge. And since I want to possibly add like a glow to just the center mirror face of the mirror in World, once I'm already in World in Second Life, adding a glow is something you do in the build menu in Second Life. But I don't want the glow effect to be on any of these other faces of the frame. That means I need to make sure that this mirror face is going to remain a separate face that can be assigned texture properties separately from the rest of the texture faces on the mesh. So I just highlighted this center face here to show you. The way that I did that quickly, instead of selecting each triangle individually, was I hit, let me do it again, A to deselect, make sure down here I'm in face select mode instead of edge select mode because I want to select faces this time, and each flat surface of the mesh is a face. Each filled in surface is a face. So there's a shortcut key for circle select. I'm going to hit C, and I'm just going to, it's sort of like painting, or tap or paint or draw the selection with the C activated on what faces you want to select, and then right click to get out of circle select mode. And now I have all that selected, and I'm going to come over here to my right side, which is where I handle my materials and my textures, how I want to set that up for the mesh. And I'm going to create a new material, which is the plus sign on the right side. This is so laggy. This is really bad. Create a new material. And this is very important. I missed this step one time in a project I was doing. I couldn't figure out how to get where you can texture separate parts of the mesh separately in Second Life, in World. This is the way to do it. If you don't do this process this way and hit this particular button, it won't work. So once I create a new material slot here, I hit the new button, I'm just going to label this material as the mirror face. So mirror face, you can call it whatever you want, and then click away to confirm that. And then the next step is to hit the assign button. Hit the assign button as many times as you can remember to make sure that you have assigned only the selected faces to this material slot, or in other words, to this texture slot. It's kind of synonymous. Over here on the right side of this tab is the texture tab, the little checkerboard. I am going to also create a new texture for that. So I can't really get into detail right now about that, but this is just generally how you would do that. Make sure you have a texture slot and a material slot, and that you've hit the assign button for those faces. Now I need to do the same thing for the remaining faces. So I am going to inverse my selection right now as an easier way to get the rest of the mesh selected. But first, actually, what I'm going to do so that when I unwrap this, it's faster, I'm going to create a seam around the edge of the mirror face, the circle mirror face, so that it's separate when it unwraps on my UV map. So I'm going to come over to the shading tab here on the left side of the screen, come to where it says mark seam. I'm going to deselect all of my faces right now because I only want to mark a seam along the edges around this center mirror face. So I'm going to hold the Alt key and right click that edge loop that goes around the whole center face. I don't know if you can see that, but it's highlighted in orange. And now that I have only the edges selected, I'm going to hit mark seam. It's the same thing as having a piece of fabric and you have a pencil and you're drawing out around the edge of the shape that you want to cut out separately, to lay out separately. It's the same thing. So now that that seam is marked, it's going to stay highlighted in red even when I have the mesh deselected. So all this does is tell Blender that when you lay out when you create the UV map for this mesh and you lay out the pieces, it tells Blender where to cut the separate faces apart from each other so that you can texture them the way you want or texture them separately. The way that you mark seams or do that is completely up to you. If you want to mark seams or just leave it connected and that's all going to be something that depends on you and what your preference is. I like to use seams where sometimes. So okay, that's done. Now I'm going to come over to my, let's see if this works, because you can select, okay, no, it's not working yet. You can select a mesh also by the material that it's assigned to, but I need a second material to do that with. So I'm going to just select, go back to face mode down here at the bottom, and I want to hover over the edge of the frame, and let's see if this works. I don't know if it will. Hit L. Yeah, so I hit L to select only the part of the mesh that my cursor was hovered over, and it's going to group all of the faces that are all part of the same selection. In other words, it's not going to include mesh that has a seam that your cursor was not hovering over. So that doesn't, I'm sure that doesn't make sense to people who are new to Blender, but anyways, hovering over what specific part of the mesh you want to select and hitting L, the L key, is a quick way to select a part of mesh. Or I could have just deselect and select the center frame and the center face, sorry, and just gone down to the select menu at the bottom and choose inverse, because it's going to give me, then it's going to select the inverse of what I have selected. So that's another way to get the rest of it selected. So now that I have that selected, I'm going to come over here to the right, do the same thing, create a material slot, and it's taking a minute because of the lag. It's the plus button, new material, new button, and assign. It's because I want the rest of that mesh to be assigned to the second material slot. And I'm not sure if it's taking that because of the lag. There, now I saw the button was pressed. Now I'm going to name this one just the frame. If I can get that selected. Yeah, there we go, frame. And you can have up to 8 of these material slots. So that means that you can texture up to 8 separate sections of your mesh on one piece of mesh. And so I'm going to go over to the texture tab here and make a texture slot for this second material, if the lag will let me. Oh my goodness, this is really bad. Okay, click the new button to create a texture slot for that. There. Now, so this is all set up. At this point, this piece of mesh is ready to be unwrapped for a UV map and brought into SL, but I'm going to do all the frames together in the same scene here, and then I will export it for SL. So I'm going to stop here and work on the rest of the frames because it's so laggy right now. It would take me forever to do that live, even though I wish I could, and I'll bring you back at another point in the project here. Okay, so at this point, I went ahead and finished my frames. It was just too laggy on my computer and I had to restart and everything. So I just wanted to come in at this point and show you really quick how I bake a texture for the mesh. So I already did the other ones. This is now the center circle mirror, and I already laid out the UV map, which I'll show in another video, and I'm just going to hit bake. And so it's going to bake on the ambient occlusion, which displays the lighting and shading on your mesh. So this is like those textures you get in the mesh template kits that you just apply your own texture to in Photoshop or GIMP. That's what this is creating right now here in the bottom right corner in the UV image editor window. Sometimes it goes pretty quickly. I used 22 samples in the ambient occlusion settings panel, which I'll go over another time. But it just depends on how complex the mesh is, sometimes how quickly it goes. So wait for that to finish. Okay, and it finished now, so as you can see, if you go into object mode, it has the shading on it. So that's what we want. And I'm going to save this image, and save as image in my project folder, which I don't know why it keeps going back up. And I'm going to call it Oval Mirror AO and save as a ping file. And then I'm going to export the UV layout as well, which exports an image of the UV lines so that I know how to texture within what bounds to texture. So UV's menu, export UV layout, and I'll call it the same thing with UV. So oval mirror AOUV, save it. So now I have both of those layers I can bring into Photoshop to texture. Okay, so another thing I wanted to quickly show how to do really quick, I don't know if you're new to this in Mesh and Blender, maybe you don't know how to do this, but it's how to create a shadow prim, because I want to have a shadow that is cast on the wall wherever these will be placed. So I want to make sure these are kind of on the same y-axis. And then I want to go to add a mesh plane, which is Shift A. I have my screencast keys turned off again because it was lagging me out, I think. And I'm going to move this over and eyeball this that it's center enough around this arrangement of the frames. And these frames are separate objects, so they will come into SL as a temporary linked bundle that can be taken apart, but I do want them to be imported together, and I want them to have one shadow prim, so moving that back behind the mesh, and make sure there's not too much of a gap there. This is just the way I do it. Maybe there's a better way to do this, but it's the way I always do it. Make sure there's no mesh sticking through on the back side. And I'm going to go with that for now, because I don't want it to be clipping the mesh either, but I want it to be close. That looks good. And I'm going to bake out the shadow onto this prim now, so I need to, this shadow prim is a separate object, so I need to unwrap it, unwrap the square, create a new image, make sure it's an alpha, so it can be transparent. Then I need to give it a material, so new, assign the material, and then go down to shadow, the shadow option, choose shadows only. This is so that it bakes out on a transparent background, so that you don't just have a shadow against a white background. And then create my texture slot there, and that is all set up. And then go over here to the render tab, the camera icon, and choose full render and bake. It's going to bake out the shadow here in the bottom right corner, which takes a minute sometimes, so I will be back when that's done. Okay, so it has completed baking the shadow. It's over here in the bottom right corner. I'm gonna save that out to my computer, image, save as image, and I'm just gonna call it the frames shadow and save as image. And then it's not going to preview. I haven't figured out how to have it preview with transparency in Blender, but it'll just show as a black prim. But in World, this will appear as transparent. So that's how I do my shadow prim. And when I export my frames, I do include the shadow prim as part of the bundle. So I'm going to File, Export, Collada, and call it Vintage Picture Frames. And so that's ready to bring in, and I'm going to save. That's ready to bring into SL, but I'm going to jump over to texturing in Photoshop. So I will continue there.